One of early cinema's most beloved directors has got to be Frank Capra, the guy who made It's a Wonderful Life and Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. In his autobiography, Capra gave this line of advice to other aspiring filmmakers: "There are no rules in filmmaking, only sins." This video is not about Frank Capra. It's about the directors who came after him and took those words a little bit too literally. From drowning your protagonist to bees being poured into an actor's throat, and even a film set that left the lead lady traumatized, these are the stories of horror directors who actually tortured their actors.
I was so furious and said, "Turn the effing camera off."
When it's hitting my head, that steel goes right through the foam. I mean, it hits so hard that there is blood back there, and you see it in the movie.
This is why he had chosen unknown to do this movie. So he says, "I got a little sucker here."
It's dark. I don't know where we are. I don't know how much oxygen I have. What the F is going on?
I compared it to going into the army because it was like boot camp to me. Because I was like, I've got to make it through. I've got to make it through.
He'd turn on you in a moment and say, "All right, you're the big fella. Let's see it." That's about as harsh as he ever got with me. He was a completely different director with Shelley.
That's not the full Frank Capra quote, by the way. The full text says, "There are no rules in filmmaking, only sins. And the cardinal sin is dullness." He was trying to say that the real cinema sins are making the movie boring. Someone tell Jeremy Scott he can chill out. Usually in my videos, I'm focused on the lore and what's canon, which is usually limited to whatever makes it into the movie. But today, I'm gonna be looking just outside the frame and into the real-life terror that unfolded on some of the genre's most infamous productions, where the performers were pushed to their physical and psychological limits by directors chasing cinematic perfection. Welcome to CZsWorld, the channel that gives you a new look at the horror films that you thought you knew. I've been told by other YouTubers that asking people to subscribe early in the video actually works, but that's kinda cringe. Don't make me do that.
I don't give a flying into a rolling donut.
Ah yes, William Friedkin. We're actually gonna get to him later in this video. Mostly because of this.
Do you physically attack people you work with?
There have been occasions.
There are many stories about horror directors torturing their actors in the name of glory.
No, I haven't done it more than 570 times.
But I'm gonna start with the tame, if you can even call drowning a person tame, and work my way up to the absolute psychopaths.
Hey!
If there's any horror franchise that's synonymous with torture, it's the Saw franchise, whose central antagonist, nicknamed Jigsaw, is known for his elaborate traps, which are really torture devices poorly disguised as an extreme method of rehabilitation. By the time Saw 5 came out in October 2008, Jigsaw's legacy lived on thanks to an ever-expanding roster of secret apprentices helping him from behind the scenes, and the FBI is doing everything they can to catch the successors before another victim falls into the next trap. Special Agent Peter Strahm is hot on the case, but soon finds himself ambushed by a pig-masked Jigsaw disciple. Strahm awakens in a device that we call the water cube trap, a rapidly filling glass box designed to fit about 10 gallons of water and one FBI agent's head. It's like that Panic at the Disco video, except Strahm can't breathe under the water like they do. But if you want to hear me talk about that, you gotta watch my Panic Band history episode over on my other channel, Pumpkin Metal. Strahm, with only moments to cook up an escape plan, performs an improvised emergency tracheectomy with his pen and gets out
on a gurney with a fucking hole in my throat.
Yeah, that. You didn't have to interrupt me though. But in real life, the actor Scott Patterson also nearly drowned more than once. He claims the producers didn't take proper safety precautions at first, and 13 years later, he still wasn't happy about it.
The bonehead producers didn't think to plug my nose with wax or Vaseline so that I wouldn't drown.
In an interview with MovieWeb before the film's release, Patterson elaborated on his experience with the stunt and how close it came to going catastrophically wrong. He said, "After the very first take, water shot up in my nose, and I swallowed a large amount. They reset and did it again, and we got the same results. I almost went into shock. I was shaking uncontrollably because I was so frightened, but they had to get the shot." Part of this goes back to the style established in the original Saw. Many traps are shot in a chaotic fashion, with lots of frantic cutting around to different angles to give the viewer the same sense of panic that the characters experience. But where the other actors' traps were only meant to look dangerous, this one really had Patterson submerged. He described people on set being nervous and medical personnel on standby. But what happened during the money shot may have crossed the line.
I think a lot of people can relate to the feeling of being trapped. Not like in a horror villain death trap kind of way, but in life. A lot of people end up staying at a job that kind of sucks but pays the bills. Early on in my YouTube channel, I was throwing everything at the wall to see what sticks, but as soon as I got into horror analysis, everything clicked. If you're ready to make that move but don't know where to start, let me introduce you to today's sponsor, Southern New Hampshire University. SNHU is one of the largest accredited universities in the country and offers some of the most affordable online tuition rates in the nation. With over 200 degree programs, many online, everything's built around flexibility. No set class times, you work when you can, where you can. You can transfer up to 90 credits towards a bachelor's degree, including credit for military and other work and life experiences too, which can help you finish your degree faster and for less money. I'm personally interested in their psychology degree, since it's something that always has a presence. Everything from psychoanalyzing horror villains to making thumbnails that people actually want to click on. If you've been thinking about taking a step towards something new, go to snhu.edu/CZsWorld to find your path forward. I realize that's a lot of letters to remember, followed by the word world, so for your convenience, the link will be in the description. That's snhu.edu/CZsWorld. The architect of the terror that we call the water cube trap was director David Hackl, who had designed the traps for Saw 2, Saw 3, and Saw 4 in his previous role as the production designer. The water cube was originally going to be a Saw 4 trap, but since it couldn't be made to work, the idea was revisited for the 5th one, which meant that the franchise's riskiest stunt yet would happen with Hackl at the helm. And for a franchise built on extreme human suffering, that's saying a lot. It seems that Hackl knew the challenge that this would pose right from the start.
Really, for this purpose, it was the practical issues of how are we going to get a guy's head in there quick enough that he's comfortable and safe? We were very worried that it just wasn't going to work out in any way, that the box was going to drain or that it was going to not feel fast enough and therefore make it so that he had to hold his breath too long.
During some takes, Patterson had to hold his breath for up to a minute, which is already nerve-wracking knowing that you can't simply come up for air, but I imagine when you're also acting and moving around and getting your heart pumping, that minute feels a lot longer.
The symbol for I want to get out of here was originally this, and it turned into this.
Yes, let's laugh about the drowning employee. Being a Saw fan who has experienced the Saw haunt at Six Flags, I wondered if they could have done a similar effect where there's an air pocket inside the water tank. But after comparing, it wouldn't be the same. Look at the way Strom's hair floats around in the water. But I don't think that's the only value in doing it the way that Hackl and his team did it. Because, like it or not, I think it does add to his performance.
If fear can show on camera, it really shows in this scene. And, I'm not sure how much is acting, how much is not acting, but I think anyone in that situation would have been terrified.
This is going to be something of a recurring moral quandary throughout this video. The job of the actor is to convince the audience that the situation that they're seeing on screen is genuine, even though it isn't. But the job of the director is to draw reactions out of the actor, often by making the scene feel as genuine as possible. In a romance, that's getting the actors comfortable with each other. In a drama, that's putting the actor in an emotional headspace. The tricky part is that we are operating in the horror genre, where more often than not, the emotion that the director needs to elicit is fear. So the ethical question is, where do you find that balance between letting the actor act and letting the director terrify? Before we answer that, I should clarify that the filming of Saw 5's Water Cube may technically qualify as torture in the form of controlled drowning, but I don't think that it was unethical because safety was taken into consideration, even if it didn't always feel like it.
There were safety guys there was emergency valves. I could get out from the bottom, but not so easily. Needed assistance. And it was just like, okay, maybe today's the day I check out.
And nothing that happened violated the actor's consent. Scott was prepped months before the shoot, he was made aware of the risks, and he was even offered a stunt double, but he agreed to try to do his own stunt. The water in the nose thing was surely an unforeseen issue. Like, I've swam underwater, I'm sure you have. Most people can hold their breath without plugging their nose, but apparently not everyone can do it naturally, and I'm guessing Scott just happens to be one of those people. I think the reason he was so vitriolic towards the producers has less to do with this scene, and more to do with a little grudge that he has over his character getting killed 2 movies into a 3-movie deal.
When it's your time to get crushed, you get crushed. That ended great friendships. I was not on board with that part of the script, which they hid from me.
But it sounds like he was on board with the water cube, claiming that after they plugged his nose, it was easy, and he even offered to do a longer take once he got used to it, saying, "Look, I know it's gonna look like I'm drowning, and I know you guys are going to be scared, but keep the cameras rolling until I give the signal." For that reason, I'm dubbing this as the least torturous scene that we'll talk about today. Scott Patterson may have walked away with beef with the producers, but at least he could be proud of the legendary performance that he got out of it.
The actual seeing of the trap and how it worked and the expression on Scott's face was breathtaking.
Speaking of legendary, horror icon Tony Todd took a different approach on the set of another celebrated franchise. He made sure that if he was going to suffer to get the shots, he'd be getting a little something extra for it. The 1992 classic, Candyman, tells the story of an urban legend, a vengeful spirit summoned by saying his name 5 times in the mirror. In life, the Candyman was known as Daniel Robitaille, an African-American artist in the Reconstruction era after slavery, whose interracial romance got him chased and beaten by an angry white mob who cut off his hand and smothered him in honey before a swarm of bees stung him to death. In the movie, Robitaille comes back from the grave in 1990 Chicago to terrorize residents of the notorious Cabrini Green housing projects. This one had danger written on it right from the start. During filming, real gangs roamed the neighborhood that they were filming on location at, forcing production to pay them off and even hire some of the gang members as actors. They really saw a bunch of criminals and thugs and said, "Hey kid, you'll fit right in Hollywood."
At the end of our last day there, somebody from a rooftop put a bullet into the camera truck, and it just came through the roof of the camera truck and lodged in the floor. I was sweating.
Which has nothing to do with the torture that I'm gonna get into, but I'm just setting up the fact that risks were present during this production. And when I found out the torture that Tony Todd was put through for this one, I think I'd rather take my chances in Cabrini Green. In the movie, when Candyman is summoned, he greets victims with a bloody meat hook grafted onto his arm, and a swarm of bees spawns inside of his mouth to signal his arrival.
With my hook for a hand, I'll split you from your groin to your gullet.
To achieve one of the most indelible images in horror cinema history, a bee-filled kiss between actors Tony Todd and Virginia Madsen, Todd had to be fitted with special dentures and latex sheets on the inside of his cheeks to control a swarm of live yellow jackets crawling around inside his mouth.
I knew that was something cinematically that just hadn't been done before, so I wanted to be able to do it.
He said he could feel one of the bees had got behind the sheet of latex that I put in the mouth, and he could feel it crawling towards the back of his throat as he was delivering the take. And then when they cut, we just got everything out of there, and he was spitting bees out, and yeah, it was pretty intense.
Nope. No way. The only bee I'm putting in my mouth is beef. Like beef. Or maybe beans. Or beets. I actually like beets. But no bees. Todd, on the other hand, saw this as an opportunity. He agreed to turn his pie hole into a beehive, but only after securing a unique clause in his contract directly tied to the hundreds of buzzing scene partners that he shared the screen with. He would be paid $1,000 every time a bee stung him. That's like $2,400 in 2026 money. In an interview with People magazine, Todd said, "I had a great lawyer at the time and we got paid. I didn't mind it. I'm going like, bring it on." By the time filming wrapped, Todd had counted 27 bee stings, which of course translated to $27,000 hitting his bank account, which is probably a substantial raise. We don't know what his base salary was, but it couldn't have been that crazy since this was the role that made him a household name. Would I do this for $27,000? No, still no. It got past the blockade and crawled into his throat and stung him. Hard pass. Even if I wanted to, I could not hold still while they put bees in my mouth. I probably would have thrown up, and then they would have all stung me, and then my tongue would be so swollen and I wouldn't be able to swallow, and then I would have died. No idea how Tony pulled that off, but congrats on the payday, I guess. But not everyone on set had that kind of leverage. While Todd turned his pain into profit, the rest of his castmates were left to the mercy of director Bernard Rose. Yes, that's how you pronounce it, and it should have been everyone's first sign that they were going to get burned by doing this movie. Rose had a very particular energy, known to push his actors to a place that at times could be deeply uncomfortable.
Bernard's a bit mad, you know. Bernard's, wacky.
He is a very original soul.
He'd be twisting his head and kind of talking like this, running around twirling his hair going, "More blood, more blood, more blood."
Virginia Madsen, who plays the film's protagonist, Helen Lyle, had a very different experience on set. For starters, they found out during pre-production that she's deathly allergic to bee venom. Actually, Virginia knew that she was allergic, and when she tried to tell Bernard, he said, "No, you're not allergic to bees, you're just afraid." She had to go get tested at UCLA Medical Center to prove her allergy. Naturally, you'd assume that Bernard then opted not to use real bees when she was on set, or opted to shoot her bee scenes from behind with a stunt double. But no, old Bernie just said, "We'll get some paramedics and it'll be fine." So anytime bees were required for one of her scenes, an ambulance was parked outside the soundstage, and paramedics were just placed behind the camera, ready to administer life-saving support at a moment's notice. They basically just proceeded with the expectation that she would receive a deadly sting. But did the director offer her any bee sting redress money? No, because she didn't know about Todd's contract until they were done shooting. Apparently, the bee wrangler told her that she'd be less likely to get stung if she wasn't nervous, but I don't know how you have any control over that. Somehow, miraculously, life went on for Virginia Madsen as she didn't incur any bee stings, but not before a 45-minute cleanup where each bee had to be recollected using a special vacuum, which means they continued to crawl on her all the while. Just imagine being deathly allergic to bees, and you go to bed that night and you just feel a tiny little itch, and for the rest of the night you have to lie there and wonder, did they really get them all? I'd take the drowning thing over that torture. But apparently that experience wasn't hair-raising enough, because the mad director also devised, let's be generous and call it a questionable method for getting Virginia into character, by employing hypnosis.
Bernard came up with the idea that for any scenes where Virginia was going to come into contact with the Candyman, he decided that it was best to actually hypnotize her.
When she saw him, she would be hypnotized, like as if in a trance, as if no longer really in the real world.
Rose and his lead actress went to a hypnotist who proceeded to put Madsen under a trance. Those of you who watch my videos are probably expecting me to debunk hypnosis right now, but actually hypnosis is supposedly a real scientifically recognized state. It's just not quite how it is in the movies. It's more of a mental state of focused attention and reduced peripheral awareness. I personally don't think that I've ever experienced it, but I'm willing to accept that it exists as a psychological thing because it isn't claiming to be a supernatural thing. I mean, if Danny Gonzalez made a video called "I got hypnotized to see if it's fake," and then concluded that it's not fake, there's gotta be something there.
I can't believe it, but I genuinely didn't realize I was hypnotized until the next day when I watched the footage and realized how out of it I was. I guess in the end, hypnotism is real, but it doesn't feel at all how I thought it would. It kind of just felt like I was very relaxed.
And the way Virginia Madsen looks during those scenes in Candyman is pretty similar. Apparently, while she was under, the hypnotist gave Rose a keyword that he could use at will to put Madsen under and then to pull her back out while they were filming.
2 days later, I just tried it to see if it would work, and lo and behold, it did. She went...
During the scenes where Helen was supposed to interact with Daniel Robitaille's spirit, Bernard Rose cleared the set, sending the crew to the opposite side of the room and demanding total silence so that Madsen could focus entirely on him, and the hypnotic suggestion being planted in her mind. According to the actress, the hypnosis worked too well. She claims large chunks of time were blanked from her memory. Her pupils would dilate under her director's spell, making it difficult to see the lights, crew members, or her hook-wielding co-star. The only thing she remembered with any clarity was Rose's voice and his precise instructions.
There was, I think, one day where she didn't really remember the entire day of shooting. And I think that pissed her off a little bit, so she didn't want to do it after that.
By the end of it, I was like, you know what? I can't do it anymore, Bernard. Don't come near me with that look on your face, because I'm not going under.
Whatever you think of the ethics of this hypnotic method, there's no denying the power of Madsen's performance and its impact on the film's longevity. As for my thoughts on the ethics of hypnosis, it's hard for me to give a concrete answer without being hypnotized myself to understand really what the limits are on the human mind. But my inclination is to say that I don't have an issue with the director using it to get a desired performance in a film. I do feel like the effects have to be a little bit exaggerated, because if it was really that powerful, hypnotists would be among the most powerful people in the world. Or are they? At the end of the day, creating an environment where the actors can succeed in getting into character is the most emblematic part of directing. And using hypnosis, whether Madsen liked it or not, didn't actually hurt anyone.
As the producer who was watching the clock, do I really believe that Virginia would not have been capable of the same performance simply being told to act hypnotized? I can't say.
It all created a highly charged environment that worked anyway. Whether you believed or not really wasn't the point. It was whether Virginia and Bernard believed, and whether when she looked at me, she believed.
Maybe that kind of intensity is what made audiences in 1992 believe that Candyman was more than a myth. But even with the hypnosis, Bernard Rose's psychological manipulation of his leading lady pales in comparison to what Stanley Kubrick pulled off 13 years earlier.
How could you? How could you?
Stanley Kubrick's The Shining, the greatest movie of all time, follows writer Jack Torrance as he unravels after taking a job as the Overlook Hotel's winter caretaker during the violent Colorado snowstorm season. He's hoping the quiet isolation will help him focus and finish his manuscript by the end of his stay, but all it really does is turn him into a deranged TV host who wants to chop up his wife and kid into little bits.
Here's Johnny!
Actress Shelley Duvall.
Hello.
I'm Shelley Duvall.
Plays Jack's tormented wife, Wendy Torrance. Shelley quickly found out that being chased by an axe-wielding maniac and dragging her co-star into a storage pantry actually weren't going to be the most difficult parts of the shoot, because The Shining was directed by the notoriously exacting director Stanley Kubrick, who is said to have pushed Duvall to the brink of madness in pursuit of an intense, realistic performance. And Kubrick got what he was after, but Duvall was never the same again.
You always dislike whatever the cause is of pain. You always resent it. So I resented Stanley at times because he pushed me, and it hurt, and I resented him for it. I thought, why do you want to do this to me? How can you do this to me?
Wendy's character is emblematic of domestic abuse, but with the added element that she's trapped in isolation with her abuser, leaving her broken, frayed, and exhausted from the constant state of self-defense needed to protect herself and her son. Seeing her get startled by the ghosts of the hotel was one thing, but what takes her performance to the next level is watching the stress and desperation build on her throughout the winter. Kubrick helped her achieve this performance by isolating her from the production team and fellow castmates, forcing her to cry and scream for hours on end until she had no tears left, with her hair falling out from the stress, and scolding her publicly in front of the crew. Kubrick's torture was a psychological one. You can even see this from the very beginning of the behind-the-scenes documentary. The camera follows Nicholson as he gets ready and makes his way to set one morning, blowing right by his female co-star without even saying hello. While most people wouldn't take offense to a slight like this, Kubrick's strategy was to deprive her of one of the things that she thrived on most: attention. She spoke about what it was like working with a much bigger star in Nicholson.
There were times where I felt a bit jealous because he got very, very much attention. And I suppose I like attention.
But Kubrick's treatment of his story's primary heroine goes way beyond a little jealousy. It seems like he basically took every opportunity to make life on the Overlook Hotel set harder for her.
Look at this. I pulled all my hair. I pulled hunks of hair out on the windowsill. And the back got cut.
Need to trim that.
Hunks of hair.
Oh, look.
Okay. Well, don't sympathize with Shelley.
You don't sympathize with Shelley. Why not?
It doesn't help you, wouldn't it?
Yes, it does.
On one occasion, he even embarrassed her by scolding her in front of all of their coworkers.
Nobody even said roll video.
There's no desperation. Oh, come on. What do you mean roll
2
video?
seconds.
We're fucking killing ourselves out here, and you're going to be ready.
I am too. I'm standing
Should we
right
play
by
mood
the
music?
door. No, I can't
Yeah, but when you
hear.
came in like this, you should have just...
We're sitting there because they say, wait a minute, and then you say on the radio,
But when you
go.
do it, you've got to look desperate, Shelley. You're just wasting everybody's time.
Personally, I'd be a little hesitant to treat the person holding a carving knife bigger than my head like that. I mean, it's probably a fake knife, but Kubrick did have a thing for authenticity, so you never know. And speaking of extreme measures to achieve the performances he wanted, one of the most infamous scenes in the film pushed Miss Duvall to the limits of her endurance. In one of The Shining's most pivotal scenes, the now iconic staircase sequence, a sobbing Wendy fends off her crazed husband with a baseball bat. You think maybe he should be taken to a doctor?
Yes.
When do you think maybe he should be taken to a doctor?
As soon as possible.
As soon as possible. Yeah, that one. Now, Stanley Kubrick always had a reputation for doing a lot of takes, often shooting upwards of 30 per scene. In my experience being on film sets, the norm is usually about 4 takes per camera setup for a normal dialogue scene. But for this scene between Wendy and Jack heading up the stairs of the Colorado Lounge, Kubrick demanded a mind-melting 127 takes. And keep in mind, this is all while walking backwards up a flight of stairs, crying hysterically, and swinging a baseball bat 41 times each take. It's not hard to come to the conclusion that this was not Kubrick trying to correct an error that they just couldn't get right. This was Kubrick trying to exhaust his actress, to push her to her absolute limits physically and psychologically so that her mental state would match what her character was supposed to be feeling. When asked about that insane number of resets by a reporter from the BBC a year after the film's release, Shelley laughed away the question.
I don't know, I think I'm supposed to say 18. But I don't know, I'll leave that to your imagination.
It's usually never a good sign when someone says, I'm supposed to say 18. Steadicam operator Garrett Brown is allegedly the one to spill the beans about the 127 takes, which would be a Guinness World Record if there wasn't another scene in the same movie with 148 takes. This fact could be interpreted as debunking the idea that Kubrick's intention was to exhaust Shelley with the staircase scene, because the scene that holds the record is a quiet conversation over ice cream without a lot of emotion. Maybe Kubrick really was just a perfectionist who tried hundreds of times to get the timing just right. But I would push back on that idea. Kubrick may have had other reasons for doing the ice cream scene so many times, but we know that he wanted to get under Shelley's skin by his own admission. Kubrick's own daughter, the creator of the behind-the-scenes documentary, recalled his request that the crew ignore her and avoid sympathizing with her. Even spectators who watched Duvall from the sidelines felt a palpable unease, like Academy Award-winning actress Angelica Houston, who was dating Jack Nicholson at the time. During occasional visits to the set of The Shining, she was struck by Duvall's condition, saying, "I got the feeling, certainly through what Jack was saying at the time, that Shelley was having a hard time just dealing with the emotional content of the piece. And they didn't seem to be all that sympathetic. It seemed to be a little bit like the boys were ganging up on her. When I saw her during those days, she seemed generally a bit tortured, shook up. I don't think anyone was being particularly careful of her." Duvall herself would later acknowledge that Kubrick knew what he was doing by riling her up.
And it also helps get the emotion up and the concentration up, because it builds up anger, actually. You get more out of yourself. And he knew that, and he knew he was getting more out of me by doing that.
In that 1981 BBC interview, she still maintains a positive outlook about the whole experience, saying that it helped her stamina, while also shedding more light on the insanity that she was living through at the time.
My stamina has increased so much since The Shining. I mean, you really have to be strong for an entire day, because the role required me to cry all day long, every day, and it was so difficult being hysterical for that length of time.
While Shelley's madness was caused by a seemingly never-ending stream of takes, the entire production scene was subjected to a form of madness in the layout of the set. In the behind-the-scenes documentary, we see Nicholson getting ready, but instead of a traditional actor's trailer, the space almost looks like one of the rooms in the hotel. We follow him from there, through various corridors to reach the overlook lobby set. It seems many of the sets were connected in a maze-like fashion, and no part of this was more disorienting than the hedge maze itself. Part of the psychological horror that the audience experiences watching the film is how disorienting the layout of both the hotel and the hedge maze were. The hotel intentionally contains doors, windows, and hallways that shouldn't exist, and the layout of the hedge maze changes from scene to scene, creating the subconscious idea that the hotel itself is alive. And no, before anyone asks, it's not just a continuity error, because everything was shot on a soundstage. The production wasn't obligated to move anything for anyone, yet things mysteriously changed around in the hotel all the time. And that includes the layout of the maze while they were shooting. The book Stanley Kubrick, a Biography contains probably my favorite Kubrick story of all time. Kubrick had an exacting overhead view map of the maze, which was used to get in and out and to plan his shots. Copies were given to the crew, who nevertheless continued to get lost throughout the production. Garrett Brown recalls that if you got lost and called out, "Stanley!" Kubrick's laughter seemed to come from all directions inside the maze. It's as if Kubrick reveled in making us all question our own sanity, but nobody had it worse than Duvall. She told The Hollywood Reporter, "Kubrick doesn't print anything until at least the 35th take. 35 takes, running and crying and carrying a little boy, it gets hard. After a while, your body rebels. It says, stop doing this to me. I don't want to cry every day." And sometimes just that thought alone would make me cry. To wake up on a Monday morning so early and to realize you had to cry all day because it was scheduled, I would just start crying. And that brings me back to the question that has arisen with all of these examples. There's no denying that on a cinematic, performative level, it's simply one of the best horror movie performances you'll ever see. But was it ethical?
You have the slightest idea what a moral and ethical principle is, do you?
The answer is more complicated than I've made it out to be so far. Some people will give Kubrick a lot of flack, calling his treatment of his female lead abusive or even traumatic. And based on various accounts, it's easy to see why.
From May until October, I was really in and out of ill health because the stress of the role was so great. So for me, it was just tumultuous.
But despite everything, it's hard to say that there was any injustice that occurred here because the supposed victim denies that any wrongdoing occurred. She's maintained that same position during the filming.
If it hadn't been for that volley of ideas and sometimes butting of heads together, it wouldn't have come out as good as it did.
After the movie wrapped,
I'm very pleased to have done it because I've learned more on that picture and strengthened myself and broadened the scale that my emotions can reach, I think, more than any other picture I've ever done. And Stanley took the time to teach me.
And even decades later, in that 2021 interview with The Hollywood Reporter, Duvall was more candid about the process, like Kubrick's insistence that she drive herself to hysteria by listening to sad songs and reliving painful memories in isolation for hours on end before he yelled action. All the way up until her death in 2024, Shelley Duvall defended Kubrick, saying that despite his cruelty, he was ultimately a very kind and warm person that pushed her to new artistic heights that she couldn't have reached without him. At the end of the day, I think she recognized that nothing good comes easy. She was hired to do a difficult job, and by joining the cast, she agreed to be in this very intense and emotionally charged horror film. And ultimately, it was Kubrick's job to make sure that she did it to the best of her ability. And that she did beautifully. So I'm just not gonna be mad on behalf of an adult who was never mad about this herself. Now I know some people are gonna say, well CZ, what about abused spouses who defend their abuser out of fear of retaliation? What if this is one of those cases? That's a good point, but that's clearly not the case here. Kubrick died in 1999, and Shelley still had only positive things to say. Plus, she wasn't hurt, and she clearly wasn't traumatized because she went right on doing more movie and TV roles for the next 22 years. In 2002, she took a long hiatus from acting. There are a lot of internet warriors who try to paint this story that it was her experience on The Shining that broke her and caused her to quit Hollywood. But that's simply not true. The reason she took a sabbatical 22 years later was because her movie offers were dwindling in the 90s and her brother was diagnosed with spinal cancer, so she decided to go back home to Texas to just spend that time with her family. And just one more thing I want to add, Danny Lloyd, the kid who played Danny, did not initially know that it was a horror film because they didn't want to traumatize him.
I was 5 years old, but they took really good care of me. They made sure, certain scenes were coming up and they would warn my parents, like, even though Danny's not scheduled, don't accidentally bring him tomorrow, stuff like that.
Clearly, Kubrick's methods were intense, but he was still above mentally scarring his actors. I'm not so sure the same can be said about our next director though. Just ask Tippi Hedren. Alfred Hitchcock's 1963 classic, The Birds, is all about birds. In the movie, socialite Melanie Daniels visits the sleepy seaside town of Bodega Bay in pursuit of its most eligible bachelor. Only her timing couldn't have been worse, because shortly after she arrives, the native bird population goes feral, smashing windows, pecking out eyeballs, and menacing anything that doesn't have wings. The locals are hysterical and desperate for answers, so naturally, they blame the mysterious newcomer.
Who are you? What are you? Where did you come from? I think you're the cause of all this. I think you're evil! Evil!
But it wasn't just her character who was a newcomer, because this was the debut feature film for actress Tippi Hedren, and the metaphorical slap on the face would have come from the hand of Mr. Alfred J. Hitchcock. Daniels claims she was sexually harassed and bullied all throughout production. Hitchcock first discovered her after seeing her in a beverage commercial and demanded that studio executives find this girl for him.
After Seago, you feel refreshed, exhilarated, work slick as a whistle.
Feel better.
Feel younger.
Have the figure you want. See the pounds go with Seago.
He really saw a commercial where the joke is that this boy is pulling a woman that he never should have been able to pull, and I guess saw it as inspiration. She was hired to do a screen test where she would answer provocative questions, try on outfits, and be ordered to kiss Martin Balsam, one of the actors who was in Psycho. In her memoir, Tippi, Hedren says that during filming, Hitch warned every man on set to keep their distance between takes, especially his 32-year-old lead actor, Rod Taylor. Hedren was also 32 at the time. He forbade anyone from socializing with her, and there would be absolutely no touching the girl, as he called her. If you're not familiar with Hitchcock, he has kind of a fixation with blonde women, so much so that the Hitchcock blonde became a recognized archetype. Like, it's a term that people use to describe the actresses in his movies. Usually a classy, sophisticated woman on the outside, but a little bit more promiscuous behind closed doors. Hitchcock did not mince words in his interview with French filmmaker Francois Truffaut.
You know why I favor sophisticated blondes in my films? We're after the drawing room type, the real ladies who become whores once they're in the bedroom.
Which seems strange that he's so direct about it, considering how in his films he's much more symbolic and reserved about innuendos. But anyway, Tippi Hedren was the latest in a long line of these Hitchcock blondes. No inherent problem there, but things got weird when he became very possessive of her. If he saw Hedren laughing or talking with a man on set, he would turn icy and petulant. When filming wrapped for the day, the master of suspense allegedly had her followed, and even cruised past her house after hours in his private limo.
He would drive by my house to see whether I was home. It was becoming very, very frightening.
Creepy, very.
Yeah, creepy.
So how would you know that he was driving past your house?
Because I saw his car.
That's very disturbing.
Yes.
It's like straight out of one of his movies.
According to Hedren, it was in that very limousine where Hitchcock did the unconscionable and crossed a line that never should have been crossed. During the filming of The Birds in June 1962, Hedren was kept under studio control and often traveled to and from set with the director in his personal limousine. The vehicle was somewhat of a known part of his persona. He even made cameo appearances in his films while driving it a couple times. Perhaps the nice car fed too much into his ego though, because things turned dark one day, as Hedren alleges, while pulling up to the hotel after work when Hitchcock threw himself onto her and tried to force her to kiss him in front of hotel guests and staff. This was probably done intentionally so that she couldn't reject him without making a scene, but it backfired when she did anyway, screaming and shoving him away before retreating to her room. The next day, they'd be shooting the phone booth scene, where her character hides in a phone booth and bears witness to the bird-born bedlam on all sides of the booth. In the movie, we see birds crashing into the glass and cracking it, but in an outtake, one of the mechanical birds shattered the glass into Hedren's face. Her hairdresser, Virginia Darcy, insists this was a mistake on the part of the prop master, not an intentional revenge plot by the director. But after 45 minutes of having glass shards picked out of her face, we can say that she was probably on edge. But that didn't stop Hitchcock from making advances on her, according to her memoir. These incidents include him sharing a graphic story over dinner about how he was aroused by a kissing scene he directed in To Catch a Thief, him asking her to touch him on set one day, her being followed off hours, and continued invitations to get dinner or drinks. None of this was reciprocated, and it's not like you can realistically make the argument that any of it would benefit her performance. She was supposed to be afraid of fowls, not phalluses. But he would find a way to get at her in the bedroom. Oh, no, they didn't do it, if that's where your mind went. I'm talking about the bedroom scene at the end of the movie. To this point, the film had been shot by using special photochemical effects to composite extra birds into the shot, and the birds seen in the close range attacks were mechanical dummies. The only live birds were trained animals that would fly around in the background of some scenes. Going into the finale, where the winged creatures break into the bedroom that she's holed up in and attack, that's how Hedren expected it to go. At least until right before they shot, when she was informed that there was a problem with the mechanical birds, so they were just going to attack her with real ones. Hedren wasn't told about the switch until minutes before she stepped in front of the camera. Which, that is certifiably insane. Imagine if Steven Spielberg was making Jaws and the mechanical shark wasn't working, so he just decided to have the actors go up against a real shark. So the animal handlers literally threw screaming ravens, doves, and pigeons at the female star, who, by the way, was already afraid of birds.
One of them jumped from here up to my eye, and it was way too close.
Right.
And I just got them all off of me and just burst into tears, and everybody left. They just left me there.
Exhausted and bloody, Hedren collapsed to the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. And if you think 127 takes in the Colorado Lounge sounds exhausting, you're not going to want to hear about the shoot at the Brenner home at the end of The Birds. Tippy went into it thinking that it was going to be one difficult day, but that was stretched into 5 days of pure trauma. The incident where she nearly lost her eye was especially damaging, and that ended up being the end of it. In the days that followed, Hedren was plagued by nightmares and blackouts. That weekend, she dozed off in her backyard, and when her young daughter tried to wake her, she awoke screaming and swatting at her.
Wake up.
When she returned to set Monday, she passed out in her dressing room while frantic crew members tried to wake her. She doesn't remember being carried into a car or driven home or being told that she had to see a doctor.
If you look at that movie, there aren't many scenes I'm not in.
I know, yeah.
And so when the doctor said, sorry, Mr. Hitchcock, she can't work for this week. And he said, but where she has to, we have nothing else to shoot. And he said, what are you trying to do, kill her?
Hedren's abusive relationship with Hitchcock while working on The Birds was dramatized in the 2012 HBO movie The Girl, with Sienna Miller playing the rising star, trapped in the game of manipulation and obsession with the legendary director, played by Toby Jones. The movie covers everything from the moment he laid eyes on her, to the screen test, to Hitch's painfully awkward attempts at flirting, to his cruelty on set. And of course, the bait and bird switch that left his star dodging real beaks over a brutally long 5-day shoot.
Tippy, you can't drive yourself, honey.
It's okay. Whatever she wants.
1 day. I heard you tell it would only take 1 day, Jim.
The biopic does take some artistic liberties and goes pretty extreme with villainizing Hitchcock to a bit of a cartoonish degree. I'm by no means discrediting Hedren's allegations. The film is basically an adaptation of them, but I have to believe that if all of this stuff did happen, it was a little more subtle than the way that it was portrayed in the TV movie, because realistically, that's the only way this stuff could have stayed buried until Tippy came forward with everything. And as a result, some of the information gaps that the movie tries to fill in are a little bit one-sided. For example, the accident on the set of the phone booth scene adds this little line.
Oh, you're not cold, are you? You seem to be trembling.
The implication being that he was trying to intimidate her as revenge for shutting down his essay attempt in the limo the day before. It's a clever line, but as I mentioned earlier, those on set that day refute the idea that the broken glass during the phone booth scene was an intentional attack.
I find it easy to claim, but a little difficult to prove.
But the incongruent stories do bring up an interesting question. How much of Hitchcock's insanity seen in the film can actually be proven? The second half of the based on real allegations TV movie The Girl changes gears and tries to psychoanalyze the big British director and present a theory about why Hitchcock behaved the way he did, which is basically that he's like an incel even though he's married. Like, he literally refers to himself as a porker.
Maybe she's just concentrating on a career right now.
Or is it because I'm a porker?
I don't know. Yeah, probably. But the thing is, we don't know what caused his attitude about women to become so weird. I feel like if you're gonna take artistic liberties in depicting his issues, maybe you don't also try to decode his mind in the same movie, you know? Because it's hard to tell what was being inferred about his psychology apart from what was being added for dramatic effect. But that's just my take. It was still an entertaining watch. And it was interesting in retrospect to see what was basically like the precursor to the Me Too movement, but this was 5 years before that would happen, and about 4 years before people started using the term incel online. The Me Too movement was just that, a movement. Whereas calling out Hitchcock's pattern of behavior was not organized, but some concerning things have been said over the years. None of the other blonde actresses that have worked with him have detailed anything as heinous as Tippi Hedren's story, but the main themes of over-controlling and obsession seem to have permeated earlier in his dealings with Vera Miles, Kim Novak, and Grace Kelly, while his use of intimidation on set while directing was rumored to have started with Janet Leigh in Psycho. But perhaps the best evidence is what happened to Tippi Hedren's career after The Birds. She was obligated to make one more film with Hitchcock, 1964's Marnie, but only because she was under contract. When she signed on to The Birds, before she knew the uglier side of the celebrated auteur, she agreed to a 7-year contract, very similar to the 5-year contract that Vera Miles found herself trapped in before her. When Hitchcock leaned into his possessive impulses and continued to pester his lead actress during the Marnie shoot, Hedren snapped and demanded to be let out of her deal. When Hitch refused, she called him a fat pig in front of the crew and stormed off the set, which is probably where that porker line came from. For the rest of principal photography, the actress and director communicated exclusively through a third party. During one of their last face-to-face exchanges, Hedren said Hitchcock looked directly into her eyes, his face red with rage, and promised to ruin her career.
Sadly, her career went nowhere after she parted from the man to whom she owed everything.
And he made good on his threats, refusing to submit her work for Oscar nominations or let her take other roles while he still had her under contract. Essentially, he was paying her to do nothing for years, which might sound cool if you're not in the entertainment business, but for an actress, it's a death blow, because major opportunities passed her by as her momentum fizzled, and she didn't get out of that contract until she was 38. But the good news is that, like the crazed mutant birds that launched her career, Hedren refused to be tamed, starring in dozens of films after Hitchcock tried to hitch his cock to her, eventually landing a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame in 2003. Which, there it is. There's me pointing at it. Hitch ruffled more than a few feathers during his half-century career, but one of them was not blonde nor woman. It was a young William Friedkin, who he hired to direct a 1965 episode of his show, The Alfred Hitchcock Hour. The story goes that Friedkin showed up for work, thrilled to work with a living master, and his hero barely acknowledged him, except to give him a hard time about not wearing a tie to set. Years later, when he was nominated for a Directors Guild Award for The French Connection, Friedkin wore a snap-on bow tie to the ceremony. After winning the award, he walked past Hitchcock on his way back from the podium, yanked on the bow tie, and said, "How do you like the tie, Hitch?" If you know anything about Friedkin's work on The Exorcist, you might say he still picked up a few lessons from the master who scorned him. Because, like Hitch, his directing style would also come under attack for his own extreme methods. Only Friedkin took it way further, leaving everyone in his wake in need of professional help.
Could you see her?
Yes, I could. I could see her as a psychiatrist, but I can't see her.
Not a psychiatrist. She needs a priest.
In The Exorcist, a quiet Georgetown home becomes ground zero for demonic possession when 12-year-old Regan McNeil unwittingly becomes the host of an ancient demon. Soon after, the girl is plagued by violent outbursts, inhuman feats of strength and omniscience, and geysers of discolored vomit. Desperate for help, Regan's mother recruits a grieving priest who's lost his faith, and a battle-hardened exorcist to try to save her daughter's soul. Based on the New York Times best-selling novel by author William Peter Blatty, the movie adaptation of The Exorcist thrives on director William Friedkin's refusal to treat demonic possession like a work of dark fiction. He wanted to shoot everything with a focus on realism, almost making it look more adjacent to a documentary than a fantastical horror film.
we would achieve all of these effects live in the studio, that there would be no use of trick photography, no opticals, but that everything that appears on screen would have been achieved.
This meant that the performances also had to feel real in person. He wouldn't settle for crafty editing to convey certain emotions. To achieve this effect, Friedkin used extreme methods that abused his actors' trust and put them in real danger. If you're squeamish about spinal injuries, you may want to look away from this especially vicious moment while filming The Exorcist, where a fully possessed Regan McNeil slaps her mother in the face and sends her hurtling across the room.
I had a rig around my midriff with a wire coming out the back, and the stuntman was pulling me.
So we took her back the first time, and it was a good shot. And Billy said, we're going to do it again.
I said, Billy, he's pulling me too hard. I can get hurt. And Billy said, well, it has to look real.
When she says Billy, she's talking about William Friedkin. I actually kind of hate when actors just use nicknames like that in interviews. Like, are we supposed to believe that they're such good friends that she just calls William Friedkin Billy, even though he lies and abuses her? Because that is exactly what happened. Friedkin assured his actress that the next yank wouldn't be quite so hard. But as soon as her back was turned, Friedkin signaled to his stunt coordinator. A simple look that said, "Harder." This is what the stunt guy said.
And I said, really? And he says, give it to her. And this is Ellen Burstyn, right? She's a nice lady. And so I said, okay. So when I hauled off, she came completely off her feet.
You see me hit and you see me reach for my back. I screamed in horrendous pain.
Burstyn was furious. Not only had her director blatantly lied to her face, but his cavalier attitude about safety also led to a serious ongoing injury. That violent spill to the floor caused permanent damage to her back, and chronic pain that still lingers to this day, more than 50 years after the fact. Burstyn was rushed to the hospital in an ambulance as soon as the camera stopped rolling. For his part, Friedkin acknowledged that his push for authenticity did inflict pain on his actress, but he refused to classify it as an injury, since Burstyn didn't take any time off from shooting and no insurance claims were ever filed. I have no idea why a claim was never made. I'm guessing that it's just like a 70s attitude thing that you worked through your injuries the same way that they walked uphill both ways to school. But she did go to the hospital, so not calling it an injury is some pretty insane mental gymnastics. According to Friedkin, it was better to do one brutally rough take and be done with it rather than to honor her wishes and do a series of more cautious takes. In his view, more attempts meant a greater likelihood of her suffering a proper injury. The anti-Stanley Kubrick, if you will. I think we can say that's not true though, because Shelley Duvall didn't get hurt, and safety coordinators didn't cease being a thing after The Exorcist. The rest of the cast and crew had their own accounts of Friedkin's locomotive energy, where the director barreled through safety protocols like a runaway freight train in pursuit of immortality.
Billy was reaching for the limit. He was committed to it, and he was obsessed by it himself. And that obsession was contagious.
For Jason Miller, who played Father Damien Karras, his on-set clash with Friedkin's blind devotion to realism didn't get him hurt, but it did bring him to his breaking point. So we've talked a lot about this balance that a director has to strike between setting the scene to put the actors in the perfect headspace to play a character and the discomfort that comes with experiencing fear. There are some really cool stories, like the cast of Alien not knowing that the iconic chest burst was going to happen, and the child actors in It being kept away from Pennywise until the camera was rolling. I like these because to a certain extent, acting is reacting. It's a good balance between the actor tuning out the lights and cameras and just living in the scene as that character, and the director setting things up to capture a genuine reaction. For The Exorcist, Friedkin had a slightly different strategy, which is that he would just shoot a gun when he wanted to startle an actor during a take.
That's really what pissed me off. And I told him, I said, never do that again. You know, I'm an actor. I don't need all these artificial stimulants. And he shot his shotgun. Did this close to my head. I said, you son of a bitch. How dare you do that? What if you went a little bit to the right? And Friedkin says, it's all right, we got Jack Nicholson in the wings.
And Miller does a good job of explaining the dilemma that I've been getting at throughout this entire video. Actors work for their entire lives to make performances convincing, but obviously these directors still didn't think that that was good enough. And it's hard to say that they're wrong for wanting more out of the actors. Stanley Kubrick, Alfred Hitchcock, and William Friedkin are considered some of the greatest directors ever to do it. But the question is, did they go too far with their methods? And shooting a gun at your actor, to me, crosses the line, because it's outside the scope of what the actor agreed to when signing on to the movie. Even though he was shooting blanks and not live bullets, there's just too much that can go wrong with a gun. Just ask Alec Baldwin. One common thing you'll see directors do to set the mood for their actors is play back ambient sound or music on speakers. In fact, this is something that Stanley Kubrick liked to do. I would have no issue with Friedkin playing a loud sound over speakers to try to startle Miller. But the gun is just honestly ridiculous. Like, did he have it on him the entire day and you just never knew when he was going to shoot it? It's gotta be weird seeing your infamously hot-tempered director waving around a weapon all day while you're at work.
Them and the horse they rode in on, and the ship that brought them over here, and the dog that walks behind them. Them all!
Not to mention, using a gun goes against Friedkin's stated intention to actually achieve everything organically in camera. Because, spoiler alert, there's never actually a moment where Regan pulls out a gun. So yeah, it might not have been the worst torture that I talked about in this video, because thankfully there were no accidents, but it might be the most unnecessary. But just because nobody got hurt with the gun, it doesn't mean that Friedkin was above just straight up physically attacking his cast. Take the climactic scene, when Father Karras jumps to his death after urging the demon, Pazuzu, to leave Regan's body and enter his instead. In Karras' final moments, his best friend and colleague, Father Dyer, performs last rites so that his soul can find peace just before his heart stops. But the real-life Jesuit priest who played Dyer, William O'Malley, was in need of his own miracle the night the scene was filmed. O'Malley, making his big screen debut, had trouble accessing the raw emotion required for the moment to land. So Friedkin, growing impatient after more than 30 takes on a cold DC night, stepped in to lend O'Malley a hand, literally.
I took him by the shoulders and I asked him if he loved me and if he trusted me. And he said, "You know I do, Bill." I said, "Okay," and I told the cameras to get ready, and I hit him as hard as I could across the face.
He belted me right across the chops and backed off, and I went in the scene, and if you look at that carefully, when I'm giving last right, my hand's going like that. And I wasn't making my hand go like that. That was sheer nerve juice.
When The Exorcist wrapped in February 1973, actors must have been relieved that their personal horror working with Billy, or as they should have called him, Bully, was over. But no one could have predicted that the tyrant's torturous ways would carry on over into post-production. Mercedes McCambridge, the celebrated stage and radio actor, was recruited by Friedkin to dub Linda Blair's voice when she spoke as the demon Pazuzu in the rough cut of the film.
What an excellent day for an exorcism.
Friedkin needed a distinct voice that could read as both male and female, with an elastic quality that could pull off haunting vocal gymnastics that sounded unnatural to the human ear. McCambridge fit the bill perfectly, on paper at least. Off-screen, she'd been a drunk who struggled for years to get sober. If she was going to perform the role to Friedkin's liking, she would have to break her sobriety.
She said, "In order to do what you need me to do with this voice, I'm going to have to put alcohol down my throat. And I'm going to have to, several times a day, swallow raw eggs."
On one hand, at least she asked her director to do this, so everything was consensual, but we do have a word for people who enable addicts to get their fix. It's enabler, that's the word. She also asked that Friedkin tie her to a chair with torn bed sheets to simulate the demon's pain as it struggled against its restraints. I actually do enjoy when voice actors do a bunch of crazy stuff to get into character, but McCambridge's methods are just substance abuse. Like, at a certain point you just gotta say, this isn't acting, it's just a literal relapse. In between takes, McCambridge chain smoked and pounded shots of whiskey, warping her voice and pushing it to the brink of failure. The process often left her in tears, running into the arms of two priests on standby for spiritual support during her performance. But it worked. The inhuman rasp it produced was so effective, Friedkin compared it to legendary saxophonist John Coltrane playing multiple notes at once.
Your mother's in here with his card. Would you like to leave a message? I see that she gets it.
So what can we take away from all of these stories of human torture on Hollywood film sets? Other than the fact that Tony Todd was literally just a god among men, incapable of feeling fear. I think it's that everyone is going to have a different tolerance, and not everything is black and white. I came into this video thinking that I'd be reaming most of these directors for their injustices against actor kind. And I do think there were a lot of what I'd consider to be filmmaking crimes discussed in this video, don't get me wrong, but for each of these examples, I had to at least think about it and consider both sides. Because they all fell somewhere on the same scale of allowing actors to do what they were trained to do and act, and the directors doing their jobs by creating opportunities for them to react. Even in the most horrible cases of torture, I found myself considering the position of the director. Is William Friedkin firing a gun really that different than Ridley Scott surprising the cast with a chest burster? The answer is yes, it is different, but they exist on the same scale. And from the actor's point of view, maybe Shelley Duvall and Tippi Hedren should have been trusted to put on a face of exhaustion and fear in the first take. They are actresses after all, that's their job. And that's why it's important to have these discussions and make sure that we're preserving the human element while still being ethical towards human actors. and bird actors. Because as filmmaking increasingly relies on digital effects and AI, it's gonna be easier and easier to just say, we'll do it in post. But if we do that, we lose Scott Patterson's desperation to get out of the tank. We lose Virginia Madsen's trance-like fixation, and Shelley Duvall's utter breakdown of exhaustion, and Tippi Hedren's trembling, and even all that insanity that happened on The Exorcist. So it's important to know exactly where to draw the line. And also, let's be real, this is just entertaining to talk about. If you enjoyed this episode and want to hear more stories about directors behaving badly, drop a suggestion in the comments. But more importantly, if you love horror, make sure you subscribe to CZsWorld for new horror deep dives every week, ring the death bell, and select all notifications so you don't miss an upload, and I will see you in the next one, assuming we both survive.